It's a very busy week in politics, so we're going to begin this morning by going on the record with New York Democratic Congressman Ritchie Torres. And Congressman Torres joining me now on a very busy week. So good morning, Congressman. Thanks for being here.
It's an honor to be here.
So, Congressman Torres, let me get right into it. You've been one of the leading voices in D.C. pushing for Congress to expel George Santos, or for the very least for him to resign. So I guess, first and foremost, when news broke of the federal charges against him, you tweeted that Santos is not an accident, but a natural outgrowth of what you call the MAGA extremist party, right? It kind of explain what you meant by that.
Well, first, the findings of the U.S. Attorney confirm what we've long known, that as a politician, George Santos has done far more law-breaking than law-making, and he should be in prison rather than in Congress. But for me, George Santos is not an accident. He's a consequence of a party that's become a cult of personality around a fraudulent figure like Donald Trump. And Donald Trump himself was found liable for sexual abuse. So the story of George Santos, I think, reveals a deep rot at the core of the Republican Party.
You know, Congressman, I guess we heard him, Congressman Santos, when he left court the other day, he said, this is a witch hunt. We've heard that term before. What did you make of his comments? I don't know if you heard them all.
Look, George Santos is following the Donald Trump playbook of blaming everyone but himself. Never mind that he stole and defrauded and lied and laundered money. Never mind the 13 counts. He's simply pointing the finger to everyone but himself. And for me, there are only two morally acceptable outcomes. Either George Santos resigns or House Republican leadership summons the courage to expel him. And so far, House Republican leadership seems intent on protecting George Santos, because the worst kept secret in Washington, D.C. is that House Republicans need George Santos. He was the decisive vote in the Republican legislation to default on America.
Right. We've talked about that, right? That he is one of the most important votes for Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker. So I guess with the calls for resignation, the calls to expel, he was defiant, saying, I'm not going to resign. He's moving forward with his reelection. He's back in D.C. So what is next?
I mean, it's selfishness in the extreme, because George Santos is incapable of governing while operating in the shadows of a federal prosecution and a criminal indictment. You know, his ability to govern has been completely crippled by a collapse of credibility among his constituents and his colleagues. And he's depriving 800,000 residents in Long Island and Queens, in New York State, of their voice in the United States Congress. And that's unacceptable.
So, you know, and lastly on this topic, I want to move on to other topics. Are your hands tied, you know, being in the minority of Congress right now, that you can't call for a vote to expel? It has to be one of your Republican counterparts?
Look, we will continue to pressure Republicans to bring to the floor a vote to expel George Santos. The majority of Republicans in New York State have called upon George Santos to resign, but actions speak louder than words. An expulsion vote speak much louder than calls for resignation.
Okay, I want to pivot right now to Title 42 expiring. This is big news, right? The surge of migrants now being sent to New York City, Congressman. A lot of discussion about what should be happening at the border. Where do you stand on the fact that Title 42 is ending, and what should happen moving forward?
Look, there's been a wave of migration that has swept New York State and that has put enormous strain on the shelter and social service infrastructure of New York. And the challenge is only going to be compounded by the lifting of Title 42. Even though the federal government has provided the city with hundreds of millions of dollars, more funding is urgently needed. The mayor needs more reinforcements from the federal government. And President Biden should issue an executive order granting temporary protected status to the asylum seekers in New York City so that those immigrants can work. There's no point in denying work authorization to immigrants who are presently here, who want to support their families and who want to contribute to the economy.
Yeah, that's a great point. And speaking of New York City, you know, Mayor Adams suspended just last week, the end of last week, the right to shelter policy. Has been in place since the 1970s, no longer really guaranteeing a bed in a shelter to those who are arriving in New York City. There's been a bitter back and forth now between some who said that it was wrong to suspend this temporary suspension. Where do you stand?
I mean, I disagree with the decision to suspend the right to shelter. The right to shelter has been one of the greatest policy successes in New York City. The reason New York City has far less street homelessness than the West Coast of the United States it's because of the right to shelter, and that should be seen as a sacred principle that should never be tinkered with.
Right, and so the mayor's argument is, I just have nowhere to put everybody. So many locations being looked at to house these asylum seekers, right, Congressman? And there's this war of words between the mayor and the suburbs right north of your district because the city is a breaking point. So do you agree with the fact that asylum seekers should be moved, I guess, upstate then to some locations?
Well, look, we have denounced Ron DeSantis and Governor Abbott for moving immigrants around like musical chairs, right? So we have to be careful not to reduce people to pawns in a game. But I do believe that the mayor is overwhelmed. He needs reinforcements from the state and federal government, and that every state and every locality should carry its fair share of the burden, but it should be done through an orderly, coordinated process.
Understood. And lastly, Congressman, because it is a busy week in politics and a busy week here in New York City, switching gears now, the mayor weighing in on the death of Jordan Neely, saying he did not deserve to die. No charges have since been filed as of this taping. So as a congressman in New York, in the Bronx, a lot of your constituents paying close attention to this. A lot of them are subway riders. What is your reaction to the whole incident?
For me, it is straightforward. Jordan Neely was not armed with any weapon. He did not attack any person. He did not manifest any physical threat. And so there was no justification for choking him for 15 minutes and then choking him to death. It strikes me as a clear-cut case of manslaughter at minimum, which raises the question, why has Mr. Penny not been arrested?
And should the mayor have addressed that? Well, he came out yesterday, last week, talking about mental health, but really not addressing the actual incident in itself.
Well, for me, it's the responsibility of the police to arrest Mr. Penny, and then the district attorney to bring charges against him. So those are the important players here. My question is, why has he not been arrested?
Understood.
Because it's a straightforward case of manslaughter.
All right, very busy times right now. I appreciate your voice on all of these topics. Congressman Torres, you're welcome back anytime. Good to see you.
Absolutely.